This computer. All right. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar web chat this afternoon. My name is Nikki Vradenburg, and I am with Montana PBS, as most of you know, and I'm joined today by Darcy Bakkegard, my good friend at Prairie Public Broadcasting. And Darcy has agreed to talk with me a little bit today about differentiation. So, Darcy, would you just share with our audience your background?
Sure. I've been a teacher for the last 10 years, high school English and theater. So a little bit of theater, and I have taught middle school, but basically anything English, 7th through 12th grade, I've taught it. From literacy, reading strategies for struggling readers in 7th and 8th grade to every grade level, like the main English class, to AP Lit and Comp. So I'm just your English person.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Darcy's a good teammate for me because we balance each other really well, because I lived all of my classroom career in the elementary space, K through 5, a lot of combinations of all of those grade levels. And so we've been teaming up on these before, because we can kind of offer you the whole gamut of resources for K-12 schools. Our topic today is differentiation, and this is part of a series that Montana PBS has created specifically for the school in Circle, Montana, who's working with us on a blended digital coaching pilot. And I've created these resources called the EdTech Trail. You can see from my image there that we're just asking teachers to identify their skills using technology integration, thinking about being emerging, developing, or performing, and just think about your own skills when it comes to using technology with students, or when it comes to using technology to make your life more efficient, and which trail you might choose to walk on. From there, we're asking teachers to think about specific paths, differentiation being one of them. So this is the first in a 4-part series where we talk about a topic that is important to many teachers in many classrooms, and then share some tools that work for varying skill levels and hiking path levels. And so differentiation is the first one we'll be talking about. This is just some images from classrooms in Montana of kids doing various things, all of which could be described as differentiated tasks. You'll see there's technology in some of them. There's cardboard and duct tape in others, but in all of them, you've got heads bent, you've got kids collaborating, you've got kids working at their own pace and at their own level. And to me, that's what differentiation is. Darcy, do you have any personal definition of differentiation that you've always lived by as a teacher?
For me, it's that finding the right activity for the right kid. Like each kid might have a slightly different speed or a different need. So in the high school English classroom, it was a lot about differentiating by interest, as well as skill, as well as also differentiating like the output of what kids were creating. And I know that basically is, I think that's like your next slide is basically what I just summarized.
Yeah.
But for me, it was a lot about, and honestly, for me, one of the reasons why I think differentiated instruction is so powerful, not only does it really help the kiddos, but it helped me not get bored with what I was teaching. Like if I had to think about how could a kid do this in different ways, it made teaching more exciting and interesting for me. And it always made class more interesting and exciting, because if I gave them choice and they had the option to figure out what path worked best for them, it was so much more engaging and entertaining to watch that process unfold in the classroom instead of me just lecturing at them.
Yeah, I think we're always, there's nothing worse than being a teacher. For me, if kids weren't engaged, their heads went down and their bottoms went up. It was just sort of they were rolling on the floor, or they were asking to go to the bathroom, and that's for me. If I had 6 kids asking for a drink or go to the bathroom, those are my symbols. It was like, something's not working here.
And in high school, it's just
yeah.
It's basically that, and that toned out, zoned out look. Although your average 17-year-old, 18-year-old is pretty good at pretending to be engaged.
Yeah,
and could actually, or it's the, I have my cell phone under my desk and I'm messaging someone else right now.
And now that we work with teachers, we see that a lot more now too. When we're doing
yeah, so we know, like, oh yes, like now we need to mix it up. And so whether it's differentiating the content so that the content actually appeals to them, mixing up, like not lecturing all the time and mixing up like that process, or mixing up what the kid is actually doing to show me that. That's not a very succinct definition of differentiation. That's like the full definition. But that's what I think is interesting and exciting about it.
Right. And I think in this day and age, I think teachers know that differentiation is just good practice. It's not whether or not you should do it. It's just like you're already doing it.
Right.
How can you refine it and improve what you're already doing? Because we already adjust things for kids based on what they need without even thinking about it. And so today we just want to bring out just some strategies, some resources that Darcy and I like for content, process, product, all three, maybe one or the other. As I said before, this is a 4-part series, the first one being assessment. Later in this series, we'll look at parent communication. The differentiation is the one we're doing now. Later in the series, we'll look at parent communication, assessment, and lesson design. And so the tool we want to show you is here. You can get to it by looking at this bit.ly here under EdTech Diff. And this is basically a Google Doc I've created. I'll put this in the video recording link so that you can click to it here. We're probably going to spend the rest of our chat here looking at this document and talking about some of the tools that you can use here. So I'm going to switch over to that document in real time here. Darcy, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, just making sure. So again, take a look at kind of where your skill level is. And this was designed for teachers to first identify what their skill level was, and then to go down the list and find things. It's all coded then with the recommended skill levels. This isn't an exact science. This is basically just me thinking about what kind of skills you would need to use these tools. Not so much skill level for differentiation, but mostly for the use of technology is what I was thinking when I designed this. But the first one, the start here, is where I'd want everybody to start. And if you've never heard of the Cult of Pedagogy, it's definitely one of my favorite blogs. Jennifer Gonzalez writes easy to read, bite-sized blog posts about really practical, usable things. You'll see her quoted a lot in this document. And so she created this piece right here called A Starter Kit for Differentiated Instruction. And so this is a great place to start. When I looked at it, I thought, yeah, that's great. That's where I would tell people to start too. She recommends this book by Caroline Tomlinson, which I have on my shelf. It is an easy read and just talking about mixed ability classrooms and some of the easy strategies we can use. And then she does a nice job of giving us some videos from Edutopia and the Teaching Channel with some visuals. Here's what it looks like in real classrooms. And I think that's where I think teachers struggle with, well, I get that. I see how that could happen, but what does that look like in the classroom? This one here, I think, is particularly powerful. This teacher is talking about creating a menu for her students to use as they go through a chapter in their textbook. And it's an actual menu with an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert. And they have to go in and choose their appetizer, and it's 3 choices for an introductory activity for reading their textbook. Then they have to choose an entree. 3 more choices, an activity that they can do that gets them reading their textbook. They're working on either a travel brochure or a graphic organizer, and they can choose which one of those activities they do. And then they choose a dessert, which is a culminating activity that covers the whole chapter. When you watch this video, you'll see these students are all working at their own pace. They're all identifying where they are on this menu. They're all using choice and choosing the activity that they think is most that's going to be the most successful for them. And you're going to hear them talking about why they made their choices. I think it's a great video. Then she gives you some ideas for task cards, tiered lesson templates, menus, and things like that. I think this is just a great place to start with some goodies for differentiation. The other piece I'm going to let Darcy talk about if you want to. This is another post that she put up just this week, and this is one of her latest posts about making sure students have to do something. Darcy, did you want to talk about something that spoke to you on this one?
This was just a great reminder of last year, our governor in North Dakota followed a student around all day. And we as teachers were also encouraged to do that, just to pick a random student. Our administration actually was willing to sub for us to do this for part of the day, and just watch a student over the course of the day. And particularly at the high school level, the bulk of the child's time was spent sitting silently and maybe interacting with a piece of paper. And that even still, all the brain research, everything we know about how kids learn. I mean, I hear you and a lot of elementary teachers talk about that, like, right, I show you, like I do, we do, you do, and that transfer of the knowledge. And yet for some reason, and we know that students doing things, this isn't about different learning styles. And I know that that's kind of a hot topic right now because there's research out that there are no such thing as different learning styles. This isn't about differentiating for learning styles. This is about looking at how our brain encodes things. Mm-hmm. And our brain encodes things when we actively do stuff, not when we sit passively and listen to someone else tell us information. And so she shares her personal story. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom of that blog post, she has 9 and a bonus simple ideas. She talks about a little bit why this is happening, which was interesting. But then she gives us some simple, how do we fix it? And when I scrolled through this was just one of those kismet situations. We were going to have this conversation today. I read this article yesterday because it was posted yesterday. And I went, these are some very simple differentiating tasks that could be part of station work, that could be part of student choice for how they want to show what they're doing. And some of them are things that we do as a whole class, certainly. But some of these things are very reasonable, simple, tangible tools to put in your pocket for how you might help kids manipulate information. And to me, that's part of what differentiation is. Mm-hmm. It's the manipulation isn't the focus of it, but it's of having different ways for students to interact with the material. Yeah. And sitting and listening to a lecture is not interacting with the material. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need that first step, and she acknowledges that. When she talks about the steps of instruction, students need to get that information, but then they need to do something with it. And that's where I think differentiation can be so powerful. Mm-hmm. Of what are they doing with that information?
Yeah, this is a great resource, a real treasure trove of ideas that you could implement tomorrow, and they're open-ended enough that I think most kids would respond to them. Going back to the trail map, one of the things that Darcy just touched on and that came up in that document is this idea of learning centers. Now, as an elementary teacher, I lived in learning centers. I discovered, halfway through my career, probably a little too late, that if it was in small group, it was more effective, that I was going to lose them if I did anything in full group. And so I built my day so that most of my child to teacher interactions were in small groups with no more than 4 or 5 kids in that group. And when they weren't with me, they were around the room doing various things, and they just kind of rotated in and out of me. And that became just a natural way for me to teach. And as I moved into this role, I met a lot of teachers who said, oh, but I teach middle school. I teach high school. That isn't something that works at our grade level. And I really said, why not? You know, we look at best practices that we shouldn't be sitting in any one place for maybe more than 10 minutes. We should be collaborating with small groups. It should be hands-on. And the one person I finally convinced this summer was my mom. And it was by giving her this example. She's a high school psychology teacher. She was feeling frustrated that her AP Psych kids didn't do as well on their Psych test the year before, and she wanted to change up what she was doing. She was doing things pretty primarily lecture-based, and so I came up with this visual for her, and I just said, this is kind of using components of personalized learning, that you might start with a whole group activity, and it's a lecture. Some direct instruction is good, but no more than 10, 15 minutes, a mini lesson sort of thing, and then send them out into these stations. Take those components that they need to prepare for the test and do a test practice, do some essay writing. They can collaborate with one another once they're making products at those stations. Have the digital learning station where they're reading articles online or they're watching videos. And then you're meeting with those students one-to-one. You're making sure they're getting that content. And then I created this conferring schedule. They're going on the block. So she has 90-minute periods. So she was trying to figure out, you know, how do I meet with all of those kids when I only see them twice a week? And then how do I make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do at those centers? So that's why I came up with this work log of them having to keep track of what they did. And when they meet with her one-on-one, the first thing they do is they go through the work log. What have you been doing when you're not with me? She was apprehensive, but I'm glad to say she's been doing it since the beginning of the school year. She's implemented this system. She's modified it a little for her own needs. And she said to me, I can't go back now. You know, this is a really powerful way for me to teach, and my kids really enjoy it. So that was even though I'm supposed to give the kindergarten examples, I gave a high school example. Darcy, do you have examples of station rotations or this kind of strategy that has worked for you?
I do. I have a couple different things. This isn't nearly as fun as what you're talking about. But to introduce my students when we would start romanticism, and we were going to be reading, so this was kind of a pre-reading activity, that in order to read Frankenstein, which is a very difficult text for kids, they needed to understand some of the main components of romanticism. But I also didn't want romanticism to be like what we did, because for high school English students, again, like in terms of the content of like what is interesting. So we did kind of a station exploration for learning the traits of romanticism. So they had to decode. I didn't teach them the traits of romanticism by exploring different stations. So at one station, I had laid out several different poems that embody the main traits of romanticism. So I had identified those poems. And then they had a worksheet, unfortunately, but they were in groups then. And so at that station, they had questions to answer about the poems and what were their observations and what topics were they seeing. And then they would rotate. So there was a station that was about poetry. There was a station where I had a YouTube video playing examples of romantic music. So opera and orchestrations. There was a station where they were looking at pictures of romantic art and looking for themes. And so there were like 15 different paintings that showed different qualities and aspects of romanticism. And then there was a station where it was modern day films in a spliced together trailer that I just found on YouTube. But all of the films, there are so many films that still utilize the main tenets of romanticism. So there's all of these big blockbuster films that they're recognizing, like The Hobbit and all of the whole Lord of the Rings series and the Star Wars movies and a lot of action films. And they're seeing these trailers. And then at the end, we all came back together and we had a conversation about their observations. So based on these different experiences, what themes, what general things are you starting to notice? So they generated a list, an anticipatory set of what they thought romanticism would include. And then I compared it. I showed them a Google slide that showed them, here's what's actually in romanticism. And every single year, they basically nailed it. And instead of me lecturing and saying, here are the traits of romanticism, they figured it out. So they did it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's a great story. So yeah, those are some examples. Learning centers are a great way to get kids working in small groups and collaborating. And as a teacher, the smaller the group is, the more likely you are to work with a student and get them what they need.
Yeah.
Some other things that come up on here for me, I go back up here to this idea of playlists and choice boards. And those were things that I used throughout my career for different reasons. The playlist is one I never used, but I wish I did. I found it after I left the classroom. The idea that you just give kids a list of tasks. They're, maybe the whole class, the whole day's worth of stuff that they would need to do. And they're all things they could do independently, and they choose the order that they do it in. And you think about, gosh, well, I don't care if they do spelling while I'm teaching the rest of the class math. That sounds great. Sometimes the brain wants to do things, or the body needs to do things in a different way. So I love the idea of playlists. I use choice boards, kind of a tic-tac-toe, choose three in a row or choose three diagonal. They were always choices I could live with. Sometimes I used blooms to build the choice boards. If you click on this link here, it'll take you out to a resource for using choice boards and how you can use them to create ownership. It'll give you some templates there to get started. There's some ELA, some math, some science, just some things you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But I taught with somebody who we used to do differentiation workshops a lot, and she said, seriously, the most life-changing thing for me was when I learned to make a table in Microsoft Word, because there was my choice board. And you just insert table 3 by 3.
Can I share my screen?
In your choices. Yeah, please do.
I think you have to stop sharing, and then I'll be able to. Because this is another thing that is very easy in an English classroom. So we would do lit circles. So again, the students, to differentiate the content, we as English teachers had chosen 5 different books. Students got to choose which book that they were going to read. So we weren't reading a class novel. We had differentiated the content. And then they had reading deadlines. They set the reading deadlines. They agreed as a group, when are we going to have what finished? Mm-hmm. But then to stimulate their conversation, each week the students had to read their text. And then you can see for their week 1 meeting, they had to do one of these boxes.
Okay.
In preparation for their discussion, so that they had something tangible to talk about. Mm-hmm. And we did that specifically because we found, in general, they had to write some questions. That was part of their prep. They had to write some discussion questions. But without some guidance, I've found that students really struggle of what to talk about in a book, and like how to get past. You just talked about blooms. They really struggle with how to get past just the plot and what happened, and get into some of those deeper, higher order. So we would talk about Costa's questions, but these creative options also gave them another thing that was pushing them into higher order thinking. And then it forced them to explain their thinking to their peers, and gave them yet another tangible thing that they could talk about as they were going through the book. And then this was, for me, this was the tangible product on which then I could grade them and their content knowledge of those chapters, because I would listen into the different conversations. But as you just said, it can be challenging. I hear your mom. It's a little nerve-wracking. Yeah. But 5 different groups talking about different books, I can't listen to the entire conversation. No. I can only bop around and try to get as much as I can. So this was another mechanism for me to hold those kids accountable, that we have differentiated content. Now we're differentiating the product and also helping their conversation.
Yeah, I had something similar in K1. it was much simpler. I don't have an example of it because I actually lost all of them when I left my school. But we were an iPad classroom, and so we had various creation tools: Shadow Puppet EDU, Book Creator, Explain Everything, tools that I had taught them how to use. And then when it came time for them to explain their thinking or produce their proof of knowledge, they could just go to our menu and choose which application that they created something with. And so that was fun to first go through the steps of teaching them how to use all those apps, and then have them create something using the app of their choice. So I think Poplet was on there, and they really came up with some great stuff. The other thing we had was, that was how I did spelling and vocabulary, was each square would be, give your partner a quiz, create a board game, and they just, my 4th and 5th graders, they had them just crossed off the one they had done, and it was blackout for that. So they had all week to get through that choice menu, and when they blacked it out, we were done with the week. So, and that,
I did vocabulary tic-tac-toe boards.
Yeah. So self-paced, great strategy. Created at the beginning of the week, you're done.
Yeah.
Darcy, what's one more thing on here that you would want to share? What tool do you like?
I would love to just show people, because for me, it's one of those that I found late, and I would have really liked if I can show folks EdPuzzle just a little bit.
You want to share your screen and I'll...
Sure. Okay. And I can just show, this is EdPuzzle. Yes, people are going to talk about it as a flipped classroom tool, and that's true. Certainly this will help you flip your classroom. So that's differentiating your content delivery. Yeah. And I like the idea of flipped classroom and blended learning, these stations. You could certainly have an EdPuzzle station as part that students would have to watch a video. So if you don't think students have devices, or if you don't think they have Wi-Fi at home, which certainly happened to a lot of my students, I don't know if I would have felt comfortable flipping my classroom entirely. But I do think that I could have done a better job of using some videos to help teach content instead of me lecturing about it and having a station. So EdPuzzle is just a really simple way to do that, where you can take content, and they have all of these channels right here in EdPuzzle that you can search for different topics. And so you can search for different, I'm searching in my content. So you can search for different videos. And I liked this. I did start learning how to make my own videos, but for a station activity, I was like, I don't know that it really matters if I make the video. If I can find a 3-minute video that shows how to use a semicolon, and students can do that as a grammar station as part of other activities that we're doing, that's fine. Yeah. So I can take this video that's already out there and created, but I can embed my own voiceover notes. I can embed audio notes. And more importantly, I can embed quiz questions. Cool. So I can add in some formative assessment quick checks. I can add in just a question, an open-ended question, multiple choice, or I can just add a comment. So there would be some times where I'd post a video and the verbiage would be slightly different than what I used in class. So I would just put a note in the video at that point. The video is using the term, power statement. It's the same thing as attention grabber of what we've been talking about as an attention grabber. Cool. And then the nicest thing in terms of further differentiating, when I go to my classes, and some of my colleagues in my fake class answered this for me, you can now see your students who watched the video. So I've got a couple kiddos down here who have not watched the video. Always some that have not watched the video. And then I can look at I can reset their answers if they want to re-watch it and get a better test score. But I can go in and I can look at their answers to the question, and I can grade them. So now if I did have this as homework, or maybe on day 1, this was part of a station activity and they were exploring different concepts, So at the end of day one, I take a look at what they answered. So whether it's a math question, a social studies question, an English concept, whatever the subject area, this would be great for any subject. At the end of day one, I look at where they're at. And for something like semicolons, or I always had to teach in-text citations. How do you quote things properly when writing your research paper? Yeah. So I made a 7-minute video that has a series of questions in it. Day one, they watch the video, answer the questions. When they come in day two, those kids who got all of the answers correct and were good to go, they can just go start working. They could go start doing something else. But now those kids who also might need some remediation, this is a great tool for me to have a quick check of like, wow, these 5 people didn't understand this at all. Or, and this happens from time to time too, wow, no one understood what I was talking about.
Back to the drawing board.
Back to the drawing board. So now today, to redo what I thought we accomplished yesterday, but clearly did not. And then we would just have conversations about that as a high school class. So if the whole class did poorly, that's on me, not on them. Right. So now that showed me that very good formative assessment data that I could go back and reteach. But in theory, in a standard bell curve where we're going to have the majority, some of kids acing it, some kids in the middle, I could take my kids who aced it and they could review with the kids who were pretty close. And then I could take some of those kids who are really struggling and do a little bit more remediation. And that way, though, the kids who needed remediation are getting what they need. But my kids who already know how to do in-text citations, because you start learning it in 4th grade, and by the time they're in 12th grade, some kids have actually absorbed that information and they know how to do it. I'm not wasting their time and disrespecting their intelligence by making them review something that they already know how to do. So I liked this tool as a great way for me to differentiate who needs support and how can I best support them as learners.
Yeah, and I think that's really the best part of differentiation is that we're not wasting anybody's time or we're trying not to waste anybody's time. I'll get back to my screen here. I love EdPuzzle too. I think Vizia on here is a very similar tool and allows you to annotate videos with comprehension questions. And then as a teacher, you can go in and look at their answers. And you can create different ones for different kids. The one that
That's another thing with, sorry, you just said that, with EdPuzzle, once you've created the lesson, you can very quickly copy that lesson. So I've done that where I create my baseline copy and then I make a second copy and I just change the format of some of the answers. So now I can also accommodate for kids who are on IEPs or 504s. I can adjust some of the requirements in the video assessment to match what is required for that kid and make it so that they can still complete the assessment in a way that's appropriate for them. So I can differentiate on a video level much faster than if I was having to redo an entire assignment.
Yeah, and how lovely is technology for that kind of work right there. So yeah, great. The one I've been working a lot with lately is Seesaw, and I'll just share that one real briefly. It's being used a lot in the elementary classrooms. However, there is a use for it in the high school and middle school classrooms as well. And I'll just show you my test class here. Seesaw is a platform for kids to create work digitally and send it into this learning journal. And the beauty of Seesaw is there is differentiation built in. If you look at this little light bulb here, this is the activity library. And this activity library is being populated with lessons created by real teachers. A variety of topics can be covered. You can search all the way up to 9th grade all the way up to 12th grade. I didn't scroll. You can look for an activity. You can look for a subject. Everything is covered. And you can pick an assignment, popsicle 6 tower challenge. I mean, doesn't that look like fun? It's as simple as choosing that, clicking this share button, choosing which class you want to send it to. You can send it to your whole class, or you can send it to specific students. I just want this student to get this activity because I've decided that's what this student needs. You share it with that student. When they log into Seesaw, this activity is waiting for them. The instructions are there. They could do this independently if they're capable. And then when I go to my class, all of their work shows up in this feed. And you can see the things that they've done. We can import things from other apps. This is an image from the Rough Roughman app where the kids go and take pictures of different attributes, and then anything they can save to a camera roll, they can put on Seesaw. This is great for the elementary classroom where they're building things and they're creating things. I was demoing this tool for a first grade teacher, and I said, what if you just took a picture of a chart in your classroom and then you just posted so the parents can see, have your student tell you about this. She went, oh, that's brilliant, because now they know what to talk about at dinner. And it's got the same kind of blog features. You can put up photos. You can create videos. This is a video created with Shadow Puppet EDU, talking about things that we've learned and then uploaded to Seesaw. And so to me, this is just the ultimate differentiation tool, because we can create products. We can show what we know. We can annotate and draw lovely things like this, or we can use some of the pre-made activities. And I just think there's so much power in using a tool like Seesaw for differentiation. It's been a real game changer.
I love that point about being able to assign. You can do the same thing in EdPuzzle once you have your class.
Okay.
If you have different videos, so not only could I differentiate the questions, if I could choose different videos entirely, but like Seesaw, what I love about it is all the kid knows is this is what I was assigned.
Yeah.
So unlike some of the other things that we might do from time to time, even my example of using Seesaw in the class, using EdPuzzle in the classroom and having different groups work on different things and me working with some kids, that is sending a signal that these kids need more help. Frequently, and sometimes my station, like where I would be working, is with my high flyers, right? Like, how can I push them further so that they are being stretched and not bored? But either way, that's a pretty public interaction of differentiation. I love this of your option on Seesaw. So if you find 3 different activities at 3 different skill levels, you can assign those activities that are covering the same content, the same skills and standards, but with different degrees of difficulty, or maybe even slightly different content, depending. You can give that to the students, and all the kids know is this is what they are assigned. And there's a lot more anonymity of who's doing what and who's getting what and why. And for me, when I think about kids who might be, by the time they get to high school, kids are pretty tired of being the dumb kid. They've been labeled the dumb kid for 12 years, 10, 12 years. So by the time they get to high school, by the time I have them as seniors, they don't want to look stupid in front of their peers anymore because they've spent the last 11 years looking stupid. And I like any option that I can have to differentiate for them and meet them where they're at and what they need, but doing it in a way that doesn't draw attention to the fact that they're doing something different than what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I think that's, on that note, I actually want to share Microsoft Word Online Immersive Reader. Have you seen
cool.
that?
I have not used this.
Here. We'll see how fast my internet works here. But if we go to office.com, if you're an Office 365 school, or if you just set up an Office 365 account and you use Word Online, it doesn't work. This is called Immersive Reader. It does not work for your desktop version. It does have to be the online version. So if I bring up this document I've already created, and this is just a resource page of PBS resources for teachers, and I come over here to View, And then I come to immersive reader. It takes the text and it does this to it. This is in all Word and OneNote online products. So everybody's looks the same. So I can change this. I can come over here and I can make my background a different color. So kids with different visual impairments who might need a different type of background. I can change the font. I can increase the facing. I can increase the text size, make things a little bit bigger. Come over here to this magic wand. You can see I've got the nouns and the verbs highlighted like this. So this one, we've got just the verbs are in red. We can also turn on the adverbs, can turn on the adjectives. All of that is right there. The bottom here, we've got the play. So this text will be read to students if I hit the play button.
PBS resources for teachers.
We can change the female or male voice. We can make it slower or faster. They come up to this little book. I can change my line focus. Where am I? So it just focuses on this. And as I scroll, this is all that kids can see. So the kid sitting next to me may not know that I'm using this or that I need to use this, but if he wants to use it too, he can. And that's what's so beautiful about these resources, is they're available for anybody who needs them. The other cool thing is this picture dictionary is on, that when I click on a word, a video, a picture, and a word show up to be used, and then the audio that goes with it.
Teachers.
It's not perfect. There's not a picture for everything.
Sure.
But it does have some of those visual cues. And so, isn't that awesome? So this is just something that Microsoft has put into their products, and because they've got a real focus on making things more accessible for all kids. And you can find this in OneNote, and it even exists in Flipgrid now. So you can find immersive reader in Flipgrid, because Flipgrid became a Microsoft tool. So I just think it's a really powerful tool for differentiation. So we're going to wrap up. Darcy, do you have any last minute thoughts about differentiation, or tips and tricks, or anything you can tell our group?
I guess for me, it's just don't be afraid to try different things. If I counted the number of times that I didn't do something in my classroom because I was afraid it wasn't going to work, or it wasn't going to go the way that I wanted it to go, I would have been a much happier teacher, and my students would have been much happier if I would have just given it a go. And that's the nice thing, like having 10, 11, 12 years in the classroom now, I have a much calmer approach, because I realize that even if something doesn't go as well as I had hoped it was going to go, if I'm trying to differentiate, if I'm trying different things, it's way better for the kids. And whatever I'm trying is better. It's fine for them to see that being a little bit messy and not being perfect, because that helps them realize that it's okay for them to not be perfect, and that their learning is also going to be a little bit messy. And so to give, but also don't feel like you have to do all of this. Of pick one or two things, one or two tools, one or two ideas that you want to work on. And if it's stations, like what your mom is working on, really just have a concerted effort to develop a clear system for stations in your classroom. So those would be my two things. Don't be afraid to try things, but also don't feel like you have to try everything. Find one or two things that you want to implement and do, and just keep doing it.
Yeah. For me, spelling and vocabulary were always a great place to start, because it was really easy to give kids a pre-assessment and decide which words they needed to work on and which words they didn't. And then create menus or different station activities for them to work through those word lists at their own pace and using engaging activities. Same thing for math facts and computation and things like that. Those were really easy places to start with trying out some of these strategies. And the more you try it, the more likely you can see where they fit into some of the other content areas. So thank you for joining us today. I put the contact information up here for both Darcy and I. Please reach out if you have any questions, or if you want to tell us we're wrong about anything, or share your own ideas. And like I said, in the YouTube comments, we'll have the links to both this slide deck as well as to the differentiation trail map. We hope that you'll use that often and come back to it. We'll be back next Monday at 4 o'clock for another webinar talking about, I can't remember what we're going to talk about. I'll have to go back and look. So to be announced. So thank you for your time, Darcy. Thanks for joining us. Yep. And